Kanthapura, Chapter 1. This novel tells the story of Mahatma Gandhi's independence movement from 1919 to 1930 and its impact on caste-ridden villages in South India, which represents the whole India. Achakka, a Brahmin lady, narrates the story of Kanthapur to her grandchildren. Our village, I don't think you have ever heard about it. Kanthapur is its name and it is in the province of Kada. High on the Ghats is it, high up the steep mountains that face the cool Arabian seas. Up the Malabar coast is it, up Mangalore and Puttur and many a center of the cardamom and coffee, rice and sugarcane. Roads, narrow, dusty, rut-covered roads, wind through the forests of teak and of jack, of sandal and of sal, and hanging over bellowing gorges and leaping over elephant-haunted valleys. They turn now to the left and now to the right and bring you through the Lambe and Champanand, Mana and Kola passes into the great granaries of trade. There on the blue waters, they say, are carted cardamoms and coffee get into the ships the red men bring, and so they say they go across the seven oceans into the countries where our rulers live. Cart after cart groans through the roads of Kanthapur, and on many a night, before the eyes are shut, the last lights we see are those of the train of carts, and the last voice we hear is that of the cartman who sings through the hollows of the night. The carts pass through the main street and through the Potter's Lane, and then they turn by Chennaiya's Pond, and up they go, up the passes into the morning that will rise over the sea. Sometimes when Rama Chetty or Subha Chetty have merchandise, the carts stop and there are greetings, and in every house we can hear Subha Chetty's 350 rupee bulls ringing their bells as they get under the yoke. Ho, says Subha Chetty, hey ho, and the bulls shiver and start. The slow moving carts begin to grind and to rumble, and then the long, harsh monotony of the carts exhales through the darkness. And once they are on the other side of the Tipur hill, the noise suddenly dies into the night, and the soft hiss of the Himavati rises into the air. Sometimes people say to themselves, the goddess of the river plays through the night with the goddess of the hill. Kanchamma is the mother of Himavati. May the goddess bless us. Kanchamma is our goddess. Great and bounteous is she. She killed a demon ages ago, a demon that had come to ask our young sons as food and our young women as wives. Kanchamma came from the heavens. It was the sage Tripura who had made penances to bring her down, and she waged such a battle, and she fought so many a night that the blood soaked and soaked into the earth, and that is why the Kanchamma hill is all red. If not, tell me, sister, why should it be red only from the Tipur stream upwards? For a foot down on the other side of the stream you have mud black and brown, but never red. Tell me, how could this happen? If it were not for Kanchamma and her battle, thank heaven, not only did she slay the demon, but she even settled down among us, and this much I shall say, never has she failed us in our grief. If rains come not, you fall at her feet and say, Kanchamma goddess, you are not kind to us. Our fields are full of younglings, and you have given us no water. Tell us, Kanchamma, why do you seek to make our stomachs burn? And Kanchamma, through the darkness of the sanctum, opens her eyes wide. Oh, if only you could see her eyelids quicken and shiver, and she smiles on you a smile such as you have never before beheld. You know what that means. That way every night when the doors are closed and the lights are put out, pat, 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 The rain patters on the tiles, and many a peasant is heard to go into the fields, squelching through the gutter and mire. She has never failed us, I assure you, our Kenchamma. Then there is the smallpox, and we vow that we shall walk the holy fire on the annual fair, and child after child gets better and better. And but for that widow of a Satamma's child and the drunkard Dirappa's brother's son, tell me, who ever has been taken away by smallpox? Then there was cholera. We gave a sari and a gold trinket to the goddess, and the goddess never touched those that are to live. As for the old ones, they would have died one way or the other anyway. Of course, you will tell me that young Sankamma, Baba Chanav's wife, died of it. But then it was not for nothing her child was born 10 months and 4 days after he was dead. 10 months and 4 days, I tell you, such horse always die untimely. Ramappa and Subanna, you see, they got it in town and our goddess could do nothing. She is the goddess of Kanthapura, not of Telsanna. They ought to have stayed in Telsanna and gone to goddess Telsannamma to offer their prayers. O Kenchamma, protect us always like this through famine and disease, death and despair. O most high and bounteous, we shall offer you our first rice and our first fruit, and we shall offer you saris and bodice cloth for every birth and marriage. We shall wake thinking of you, sleep prostrating before you, Kenchamma, and through the harvest night shall we dance before you. The fire in the middle and the horns about us, we shall sing and sing and sing, clap our hands and sing, Kenchamma, Kenchamma, goddess benign and bounteous, mother of earth, blood of life, harvest queen, rain crowned, Kenchamma, Kenchamma, goddess benign and bounteous. And when the night is over and the sun rises over the Bebur mound, people will come from Santur and Kupur, people will come from the Santur coffee estate and the Kupur cardamom estate, from coconut gardens and sugarcane fields. And they will bring flowers and fruit and rice and dal and sugar candy and perfumed sweetmeats. And we shall offer you all, dancing and singing. The bells will ring, the trumpets tear through the groves, and as the camper rises before you, we shall close our eyes and hymn your praise. Kenchamma, great goddess, protect us, O benign one. Our village had 24 houses. Not all were big like Postmaster Surya Narayana's double-storied house by the temple corner, but some were really not bad to look at. Our Patwari Nanjodia had a veranda with 2 rooms built onto the old house. He had even put glass panes to the windows, which even Postmaster Surya Narayana could not boast of. Then there were the Kanaya house people who had a high veranda. And though the house was, I know not how many generations old, it was still as fresh and new as though it had been built only yesterday. No wonder that waterfall Venkamma rode day and night against Rangamma. Why should a widow, and a childless widow too, have a big house like that? And it is not her father that built it, said she. It is my husband's ancestors that built it. I have 2 sons and 5 daughters, and that shaven widow hadn't even the luck of having a bandicoot to call her own. And you have only to look at her gold belt and her dharmavar sari. Whore, and so night and day did she howl whenever she met Temple Lakshamma or Bhatta's wife Chinnamma coming back from the river. To tell you the truth, Venkamma's own house was as big and strong as her sister-in-law's. But she said it was not large enough for her family. Besides, she could not bear the idea that it was occupied by Rangamma's father and mother, And when the vacations came, Rangamma had all her younger brothers and the children of the elder one from Bombay, all those city-bred fashionable idiots, to spend the summer. Tell me, said Venkamma one day to Akamma, bringing forward her falling sari over her shaven head, why should our family feed theirs? If her parents are poor, let them set fire to their dhoti and sari and die. Oh, if only I could have had the courage to put lizard poison into their food. Well, that will come too. She would clap her hands and go into her house, leaving front house Akamma to hurry up her steps. Akamma had people come to visit them. You know, coffee planter Ramaiya is a cousin of her sister-in-law, and when he is on his way to Carver, he sometimes drops in to see them and even spends a night there. He left his ford on the other side of the river, for the ferry did not ply at night, and he came along. Today he is there, and people are all busy trying to see him. For midday meal he will have a vermicelli pesum, and Patwari Nanjundia and his son-in-law are both invited there. There are others coming too, the temple people and the fig tree house people and Dore, the university graduate, as they call him. He had lost his father when still young, and his mother died soon after. And as his two sisters were already married and had gone to their mothers-in-law, he was left all alone with 15 acres of wetland and 20 acres of dry land. And he said he would go to the city for higher studies and went to a university. Of course, he never got through the inter even, but he had city ways, read city books, and even called himself a Gandhi man. Some 2 years ago, when he had come back from Pune, he had given up his boots and hat and suit and had taken to dhoti and khadi, and it was said he had even given up his city habit of smoking. Well, so much the better, but to tell you the truth, we never liked him. He had always been such a braggart. He was not like Corner House Murthy, who had gone through life like a noble cow, quiet, generous, serene, deferent, and Brahmanic, a very prince, I tell you. We loved him, of course, as you will see, and if only I had not been a daughterless widow, I should have offered him a granddaughter if I had one. And I know he would have said, Chakka, you are of the Ved Shastra Praveen Christian Shastri's family, and is it greater for you to ask something of me, or for me to answer, yeah, he is the age my Sinu is, and he and Sinu were, as one would say, are Ram and brother Lakshman. They only needed a Sita to make it complete. In fact, on that day, as everybody knew, coffee planter Ramaiya had come to offer his own daughter to Murthy, but the horoscopes did not agree, and we were all so satisfied. Till now I have spoken only of the Brahmin quarter. Our village had a Praya quarter too, a potter's quarter, a weaver's quarter, and a Shudra quarter. How many huts had we there? I do not know. There may have been 90 or 100, though 100 may be the right number. Of course, you won't expect me to go to the Praya quarter, but I have seen from the street corner Bidal Tamayya's hut. It was in the middle, so let me see. If there were 4 on this side and about 6, 7, 8 that side, that makes some 15 or 20 huts in all. Pock-marked Siddha had a real thoti house with a big veranda and a large roof, and there must have been a big granary somewhere inside, for he owned as much land as Patwari Nanjundia or shopkeeper Subha Chete, though he hadn't half Kanthapura as Bhatt had. But lately Siddha's wife went mad, you know, and he took her to Pune, and he spent much money on her, but of course profited by the occasion and added a few acres more to his own domain. Clever fellow this, but one day he was sure to become the Jamindar of the whole village, though we all knew him walking about the streets with only a loin cloth about him. The Potter Street was the smallest of all streets. It had only 5 houses. Lingya and Ramaya and Subaya and Chandraya owned the 4 big houses, and old Kamalamma had a little broken house at the end of the street where she spent her last days with her only son. Formerly, they say the Potter Street was very flourishing, but now, with all these modern Mangalore tiles, they've had to turn to land. But Chandraya still make festival pots, and for Gauri's festival, we've always had our pots done by him. He makes our images too, and he even sold them at the Manjarpur fair. The rest of the potters were rather a simple, quiet lot who tilled their lands and now and again went out to the neighboring villages to help people to make bricks. Now, when you turned round the Potter Street and walked across the temple square, the first house you saw was the 9 beamed house of Patel Rangegowda. He was a fat, sturdy fellow, a veritable tiger amongst us, and what with his tongue and his hand and his brain, he had amassed solid gold in his coffers and solid bangles on his arms. His daughters, all 3 of them, lived with him, and his sons in law worked with him like slaves, though they owned as much land as he did. But then, you know, the tiger, his words were law in our village. If the Patel says, we used to say, even a coconut leaf roof will become a gold roof. He is an honest man, and he has helped many a poor peasant, and heavens, what a terror he was to the authorities. The other Shudra were not badly fed householders, and they had as usual 2 or 3 sons and a few daughters, and one could not say whether they were rich or poor. They were always badly dressed and always paid revenues due and debts after several notices. But as long as Rangegoda was there, there was no fear. He would see them through the difficulties, and they were of his community. The Brahman street started just on the opposite side, and my own house was the first on the right. Between my house and Subha Chetty's shop on the Karwa road was the little Kanthapurishwari temple. It was on the main street promontory, as we called it, and became the center of our life. In fact, it did not exist more than 3 years ago, and to tell you the truth, that's where all the trouble began. Corner House Narsamma's son Murthy, our Murthy, as we always called him, was going through our backyard one day and seeing a half sunk linga said, why not unearth it and wash it and consecrate it? Why not, said we all. And as it was the holidays and all the city boys were in the village, they began to put up a little mud wall and a tile roof to protect the god. He was so big and fine and brilliant, I tell you, and our Bhatt duly performed the consecration ceremony. And as Rangamma said, she would pay for a milk and banana libation, and a dinner. We had a grand feast. Then came Postmaster Suryanarayana and said, brother, why not start a Shankar Jayanti? I have the texts. We shall read the Shankar Vijay every day, and somebody will offer a dinner for each day of the month. Let the first be mine, said Bhatt. The second mine, said Agent Nanjudia. The third must be mine, insisted Pandit Venkatesha. And the fourth and the fifth are mine, said Rangamma. And if there is no one coming forward for the other days, let it always be mine, she said. Good, dear Rangamma. She had enough money to do it, and she was alone. And so the Shankar Jayanti was started that very day. It was old Ramakrishnaya, the very learned father of Rangamma, that said. He would read out the Shankar Vijaya day after day. And we all cried out, "May the goddess bless him," for there was none more serene and deep voiced than he. We always went to discuss Vedanta with him in the afternoons after the vessels were washed and the children had gone to school. And now we gathered at the Ishwara's temple on the promontory instead of on Rangamma's veranda. How grand the Shankar Jayanti was! Old Ramakrishnaiah read chapter after chapter with such a calm bell metal voice, and we all listened with our sari fringes wet with tears. Then they began to lay leaves for dinner. And one boy came and said, "I shall serve, aunt." And another came and said, "Can I serve pesan, aunt?" And another came and said, "I shall serve rice, aunt." And this way and that we had quite a marriage army, and they served like veritable princesses. Then, when we had eaten and had washed our hands, the younger women sang, and we discussed the Maya Veda, and after that we went home. We hastily pushed rice onto the leaves of the young and came back for the evening prayers. There used to be the bhajan. Trumpet Lingya with his silver trumpet was always there, and once the music was over, we stayed till the camphor was lit, and throwing a last glance at the god, we went home to sleep, with the god's face framed within our eyes. It was beautiful, I tell you. Day after day we spent as though the whole village was having a marriage party. Then sometimes there used to be Harikathas. Our Shastri is also a poet. You know, the Maharaja of Mysore had already honoured him with a palace shawl, and Shastri had just sent His Highness an epic on the sojourn of Rama and Sita in the hill country. They said he would soon be honoured with a permanent place in the court, and he is a fine singer too, but he is an even grander Harikatha man. When he stood up with the bells at his ankles and the cymbals in his hands, how true and near and brilliant the God world seemed to us, and never has anyone made a grander Harikatha on Parvati's winning of Shiva. He had poetry on his tongue, sister, and he could keep us sitting for hours together. And how we regretted the evening the Shankar Jayanti was over. The air looked empty. But by Kinchamma's grace it did not end there. The next morning Murthy comes to us and says, "Aunt, what do you think of having the Rama festival, the Krishna festival, the Ganesha festival? We shall have a month's bhajan every time, and we shall keep the party going." "Of course, my son," say we, "and we shall always manage each to give a banana libation if nothing else. But," says he, "to have everything performed regularly, we need some money, aunt." Money? It made us think twice before we answered. "And how much money would you need, my son?" "But if it is camphor, I'll give it. If it's coconut, I'll give it. If it's sugar candy—" "No, aunt," says Murthy, "it is not like that. You see, aunt, while I was in Karwar, we had Rama's festival and Ganpati's festival, and we had evening after evening of finest music and Harikatha and gaslight procession. Everybody paid a 4 anna bit, and we had so much money that we could get the best Harikatha men like Belur Narhari Shastri, Vidwan Chandra Shekharaiya. Do you think they'll come here?" say I. "Of course, aunt. And what do you think? Pay them 10 rupees and give them their cart fare and railway fare, and that'll do. They don't ask for palkings and avdas, and we shall have Harikathas such as no one has ever heard or seen in Kanthapura." "All right, my son, and how should we pay?" We know Murthy had been to the city, and he knew of things we did not know, and yet he was as honest as an elephant. "1 rupee, aunt, just 1 rupee, and if there is some money left, we shall always use it for holy work. You understand, aunt? That is what we did in Karwar." Yes, say I, though a rupee was a lot to me, I have 7 acres of wet land and 12 acres of dry land, and they yield just enough for my Sinu and me to have our 3 meals a day. A rupee, it was a 25th of my revenue. And tell me, when did we ever pay it in time? But the rupee is for the gods, and it is Murthy that asks for it. We always bless him. So Murthy goes from house to house, and from younger brother to elder brother, and from elder brother to the grandfather himself. And what do you think? He even goes to the porter's quarter, and the weaver's quarter, and the Shudra quarter. And I closed my ears when I heard he went to the Praya quarter. We said to ourselves, he is one of these Gandhi men who say there is neither caste nor clan nor family, and yet they pray like us and they live like us. Only they say too, one should not marry early. One should allow widows to take husbands, and a Brahmin might marry a Pariah, and a Pariah a Brahmin. Well, well, let them say it. How does it affect us? We shall be dead before the world is polluted. We shall have closed our eyes. So he goes Murthy from house to house, from householder to householder, and what do you think? He gathers 147 rupees. Everybody says, take it, my son, and Rangamma gives him a 10 rupee note and says, last harvest, when Ramayya's Chennaiya had paid back his mortgage loan, I asked, what shall I do with this money? And I sent 100 rupees to a Brahmin orphanage in Karwar. Well, money spent there or here, it is all the same to me. And then Agent Nanjundia pays 2 rupees, his son, the teacher, pays 1, and his sister's husband pays 2, 3 or 4, I don't quite remember. And so goes Murthy gathering money in his ascetics bowl. And what a grand festival we had the following Gandhi Jayanti. There were reading parties and camphor ceremonies every evening, and our young men even performed a drum and sitar bhajan. And it was on one of these evenings that they had invited Jairamachar. You know Jairamachar, the famous Harikatha man? They say he had done Harikatha even before the Mahatma. And a funny Harikatha man he is too, sister. Today he says it will be the story of Shiva and Parvati. And Parvati in penance becomes the country, and Shiva becomes heaven knows what. Shiva is the three-eyed, he says, and Swaraj too is three-eyed. Self-purification, Hindu-Muslim unity, Khadr. And then he talks of Damayanti and Shakuntala and Yashoda, and everywhere there is something about our country and something about Swaraj. Never had we heard Harikathas like this. And he can sing too. Can Jairamacha? He can keep us wrapped in tears for hours together. But the Harikatha he did, which I can never forget in this life and in all lives to come, is about the birth of Gandhiji. What a title for a Harikatha, cried out old Venkatalakshamma, the mother of the postmaster. It is neither about Ram nor Krishna, but said her son, who too has been to the city. But mother, the Mahatma is a saint, a holy man or lover of a widow. What does it matter to me? When I go to the temple, I want to hear about Rama and Krishna and Mahadeva, not all this city nonsense, said she. And being an obedient son, he was silent. But the old woman came along that evening. She could never stay away from a Harikatha, and sitting beside us, how she wept. This is the story Jairamachar told us. In the great heavens, Brahma, the self-created one, was lying on his serpent when the sage Valmiki entered, announced by the two doorkeepers, O learned sire, what brings you here in this distant world? Asked Brahma, and offering the sage a seat beside him, fell at his feet. Rise up, O God of gods, I have come to bring you sinister news. Far down on the earth you chose as your chief daughter Bharata, the goddess of wisdom and well-being. You gave her the sage-loved Himalayas on the north and seven surging seas to the south, and you gave her the Ganges to meditate on, the Godavari to live by, and the pure Kaveri to drink in. You gave her the riches of gold and of diamonds, and you gave her kings such as the world has never seen. Ashoka, who loved his enemies and killed no animal, Chandragupta, who had the nine jewels of wisdom at his court, and Dharmrai and Vikramaditya and Akbar and many a noble king. And you gave her two sages radiating wisdom to the eight cardinal points of the earth, Krishna and Buddha, Shankar and Ramanuja. But, O Brahma, you who sent us the prince propagators of the holy law and sages that smote the darkness of ignorance, you have forgotten us so long that men have come from across the seas and the oceans to trample on our wisdom and to spit on virtue itself. They have come to bind us and to whip us, to make our women die milkless and our men die ignorant. O Brahma, deign to send us one of your gods so that he may incarnate on earth and bring back light and plenty to your enslaved daughter. O sage, pronounced Brahma, is it greater for you to ask or for me to say, yeah? Shiva himself will forthwith go and incarnate on the earth and free my beloved daughter from her enforced slavery. Pray, seat yourself, and the messengers of heaven shall fly to Kailash, and Shiva be informed of it. And lo, when the sage was still partaking of the pleasures Brahma offered him in hospitality, there was born in a family in Gujarat a son, such as the world has never beheld. As soon as he came forth, the four wide walls began to shine like the kingdom of the sun, and hardly was he in the cradle than he began to lisp the language of wisdom. You remember how Krishna, when he was but a babe of 4, had begun to fight against demons and had killed the serpent Kali. So too our Mohandas began to fight against the enemies of the country. And as he grew up and after he was duly shaven for the hair ceremony, he began to go out into the villages and assemble people and talk to them. And his voice was so pure, his forehead so brilliant with wisdom that men followed him. More and more men followed him as they did Krishna the flute player, and so he goes from village to village to slay the serpent of the foreign rule. Fight, says he, but harm no soul. Love all, says he, Hindu, Mohammedan, Christian or Pariah, for all are equal before God. Don't be attached to riches, says he, for riches create passions and passions create attachment, and attachment hides the face of truth. Truth must you tell, he says, for truth is God, and verily it is the only God I know. And he says to spin every day, spin and weave every day, for our mother is in tattered weeds, and a poor mother needs clothes to cover her sores. If you spin, he says, the money that goes to the red men will stay within your country, and the mother can feed the foodless and the milkless and the clothless. He is a saint, the Mahatma, a wise man and a soft man, and a saint. You know how he fasts and prays, and even his enemies fall at his feet. You know once there was an ignorant Pathan who thought the Mahatma was a covetous man and wanted to kill him. He had a sword beneath his shirt as he stood waiting in the dark for the Mahatma to come out of a lecture hall. The Mahatma comes and the man lifts up his sword, but the Mahatma puts his hands on the weak man's shoulders and says, Brother, what do you want of me? And the man falls at his feet of the Mahatma and kisses them. And from that day onwards, there was never a soul more devoted than he. And the serpent that crossed the thighs of the Mahatma, a huge serpent too. And there were other stories he told us, Jairamacharya. But hardly had he finished the Harikatha, and was just about to light the camphor to the god. Then the Sankur police Jamadar is there. Murthy goes to him and they talk between themselves, and then they talk to Jairamacha, and Jairamacha looks just as though he were going to spit out, and we never saw him again. Our Murthy performed the camphor ceremony, and from that day onwards Murthy looked sorrowful and calm. He went to Dore and Shastri's son Puttu, and Dore and Shastri's son Puttu went to Postmaster Suryanarayan's sons Chandru and Ramu, and then came Pandit Venkatesha and Front House Sami's sons Srinivas and Kittu. And so Kittu and Srinivas and Puttu and Ramu and Chandru and Sinu threw away their foreign clothes and became Gandhi's men. 2 days later, policeman Bade Khan came to live with us in Kanthapura. Thank you.